Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're doing part B now of the Focus 4, which the subject is going to be struck by. Remember, there's 4 in the Focus 4. Go figure. The first one is falls. The second one is struck by. The third one is electrocutions. And the fourth one is caught in between. So part C and D will be coming up, covering those other two things we're going to talk about struck by right now. So by the end of this session, you guys are going to be able to list 3 main causes of struck by fatalities on construction sites and describe how to prevent those struck by fatalities and identify safety requirements for nail guns and powder actuated tools. You may wonder, what on earth is a powder actuated tool? When we get there, I'm going to tell you all about it. But first, let's talk about the leading cause of fatalities in the Focus 4 struck by, and that is vehicle and roadway hazards. Approximately 75% of the fatalities that are struck by are involved in heavy equipment. What are we talking about? When we're talking about heavy equipment, we're talking about cranes, backhoes, earth movers, any big piece of equipment, front end loaders, bobcats, any of that stuff, and getting hit by it on a job site. You think, how can somebody get hit by that? If you're keeping your eyes open, how are you going to get hit by a piece of equipment? It's a good question. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. The other two things are falling objects, stuff falling off of elevated surface above us, whether it's an upper level, ladders, scaffolds. We're going to talk all about that. And flying objects as well, pieces of equipment or materials that are kicked up and are projected and are flying through the air and can hit us. So those are the 3 main areas: roadway and vehicle hazards, falling objects, and flying objects. So let's get started. So number 1, roadway and highway. The causes of these, 41% is contractor equipment. So we're talking about just what I was mentioning. So the largest percentage, almost half, are those pieces of equipment on construction sites. 19%, or about a fifth of the accidents, are traffic accidents. So a lot of construction is done out on the highways. I'm sure that for summer vacation or even just getting around the city, when you travel, you see construction crews working along roads. And when they're working along roads, there's vehicle traffic that's going by. A lot of times people are not paying attention, and they hit construction workers, or they run into the construction site, and guys get killed or injured. Vehicles entering the work area, so this is just vehicles that a lot of times, I'm sure you've seen it when you've driven past construction sites. There's dump trucks and trucks with equipment and materials going in and out of construction sites all the time. And when they're delivering stuff and when they're leaving, everything's under time crunch. Got to get her done, keeps things moving, and so that's, people can get hit. And 18% is just other types of issues that happen. Of the highway equipment related fatalities, just take a look at this chart, would you? Who is the folks that are getting hurt most? Yeah, you're right. It's the workers on foot. Now, as an apprentice, just getting started on a job site, you're probably going to be that worker on foot. You're going to be walking around, getting from one place to another on the job site. And as a young person, you're thinking everybody on this job site is professionals. They're looking out for you, when in fact they are professionals, but they're looking out for their jobs. They're not always looking out for you. So you have to have your head on a swivel. You got to be aware of other pieces of equipment that are moving in and out of the site and around on the site, so that that you're protected and you don't step in front or behind and get hit by a piece of equipment or a vehicle. 35% are operators. By operators, I mean people that are operating the vehicles themselves. This is typically in rollover accidents. We're going to talk about how to protect the operator. If at some point you get to the place where you're given the keys to a piece of equipment, and what you need to do to make sure that you don't get squashed if that piece of equipment rolls over. And a small percentage are people that are passengers in the vehicle. So, what are the leading causes of highway? Again, for highway workers on foot, it's being struck by construction equipment. You're getting hit by a piece of equipment, a dump truck, a front-end loader, whatever. For highway equipment operators, it's equipment rollover, just like I was mentioning earlier. So what are the precautions you should take when you're around moving vehicles and equipment? Well, the first thing is stay clear of vehicles. If you don't have to be working near them, just don't walk in the path where they're driving. Keep an eye out for them. Make sure that you're just not around them. Sometimes construction sites will have a traffic control plan, so they'll have designated exit gates and entrance gates. And as equipment and materials are being brought onto the site, moved around the site, and then exit, there's a flow. And if you know what that is, that can help you make decisions as you move around the site so that you don't get into that traffic plan. You don't find yourself on the pathway that the vehicles are taking. If you're working with a vehicle, sometimes you'll be working with a vehicle, especially if you're involved in excavation, if you're involved in unloading equipment and materials. You want to communicate with the operators either by radio or eye contact. Even if you're not working with it, with a truck as it's coming onto the site, don't walk into the roadway without making eye contact with that driver. And, usually, waving your hand, making some sort of an effort to make sure they see you and you know they see you by making eye contact is a critical thing. A lot of times, the blind spots on these vehicles, you think that the cab is way up high. You think they can see you for sure. They can see you easily. Fact is, there's a lot of blind spots from almost every piece of construction equipment. The operator just can't see everything. So you want to make sure that you stay out of those blind spots, and a great way to know whether you're in one is, can you see the eyes of the guy that's driving that vehicle? You also want to wear ANSI-approved high-visibility vests. You can see in this picture, this worker is wearing a high-visibility vest. Okay, so it's a bright red color. It has some reflective material there. You can see that if it's in the evening, that reflective material will definitely show up and make it so that worker is seen. And you don't want to stand under a load. So if you're unloading equipment, if you're you know, if you're working around cranes, I'm going to repeat that a number of times during this presentation. Don't stand under a load. Don't walk under a load. If something is suspended, you know, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong with that operation, and you just don't want to be underneath a load where stuff could fall and hit you. Backing up equipment safely is one of the key things in terms of you know, safety around vehicles. Make sure the audible backup alarms are working properly. If a vehicle is backing up, you should be hearing that backup beeper. You know, and you know what they sound like. They just sound like beep, 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 just like that. They're backing up. That means they're backing up, and you should be aware of it. The problem is, you know, a lot of times, so many vehicles, you have multiple vehicles on a site, you're hearing those backup alarms all the time, and you just don't pay attention to them. And you just want to, starting out your career, you want to make sure that you're paying attention. The second point there is have a spotter to direct the operator if visibility is restricted. If the operator can't see behind them, they're going to need to have a spotter or a person that's waving them back and showing them the direction to go. If you're that spotter, you're focused on the vehicle that's backing up towards you, right? But you need to remember that you got a backside too. So there may be other vehicles behind you that are coming towards you. So, you know, just keep your head on a swivel whenever you're on a construction site. Keep your eyes open, be aware of what's going on around you, and keep adequate clearance behind the vehicle. You don't want to get stuck between a moving vehicle and a solid object. There was a case up in British Columbia where a 16-year-old was working out on a construction site during the summer and tripped and fell down behind a forklift, and that forklift backed up and squashed him against the wall and broke his back. So it was a very sad situation. But again, you know, you want to make sure there's adequate clearance behind you so that you don't get in between a moving vehicle and a solid wall. Again, wearing that high visibility clothing is important. Low visibility conditions at night, dawn, dusk, or fog are definitely times when you should be wearing that. Anytime, just I'm sure, you know, when you've been driving around in the evening, all the time you see people out for walks on the sidewalks wearing black and no reflective gear, and you know how hard it is to see people. So when you're on a construction site, you want to make sure you're wearing that high visibility vest so they can see you. And a really important thing here is that high visibility vests oftentimes get dirty because you're working, right? They get dirty and they get faded. And if they're dirty and faded, they're no longer high visibility. I know that sounds silly to say, but a lot of times journeymen and experienced workers think that a dirty and faded high visibility vest gives the impression that the person is not a newbie on a construction site. Thus, they have creds because they've been around. But the point is, if they can't be seen, it's not doing anything for them, so why wear it? Very important, wear that high visibility vest. Okay, so keeping your head on a swivel, moving around, and keeping track of where other vehicles are so you don't get hit by a moving vehicle, very important. Number 2, struck by falling objects. Stuff falls off the sides of buildings, off of scaffolds, and can hit you. So you don't want that to happen. So you have to take some precautions. First thing, cranes are often on construction sites. Almost every construction site at some point has a crane, or for sure scaffolds for for access. And these, especially cranes for loading, unloading trucks, they can be a source of stuff falling on you. I mean, look at that picture. Imagine if that roof system fell. Okay, if the rigging somehow collapsed, what would happen? And rigging sometimes does fail. So the best solution, you can see that this fellow has what's called a, let me get my pointer here and point this out to you right here. You can see that's a guideline that they're using, or what's called a tagline. So he doesn't have to be underneath that structure. So remember, loose and shifting materials can fall off. Lack of overhead protection can create a hazard. There's just nothing above you to keep stuff from hitting you. There was a case, I was on a construction site down in Vegas, ran into a carpenter down there who had been moving a bunch of scaffold using a crane, and they picked up, they strapped up the scaffold end frames, and they were lifting it, and somebody forgot that there was what's called a screw jack, which is a 36-inch metal screw that is, it's a yard long, and it's about 1.5 to 2 inches thick. So imagine a pipe that's solid steel and that fell out of that, and it hit him in the head. Fortunately, he had a hard hat on. It did break his neck, but the hard hat saved his life. And stuff can fall off of this equipment as it's being picked up as well. So you just don't want to work under the load. Also, demolition work. And demolition work is where they're tearing down a building, or they're tearing down part of a building, a floor. A lot of times people will pitch stuff out windows or wall openings. They're supposed to use chutes to make sure the stuff doesn't hit workers below, but not everybody knows that. So especially if you're working around a demolition project or a renovation project, you want to make sure that people are aware of where the trash and demolished equipment is going when it's going out the window. As far as protection against falling objects, you want to check and see if workers are working above you. Make sure that, ask yourself the question, are they securing all the loads, the tools, the materials? Or are they just kicking stuff around up there? Are they using a tow board? You can see this arrow I have pointing here. That's a tow board on that scaffold deck. And it's 3.5 inches high, and that's specifically there to keep stuff from falling off of that deck. And if you look up and see a scaffold doesn't have toe boards on a working surface, you don't want to be around that close by because stuff could fall off. If they should have it, you might want to mention that to somebody. There should be a toe board on it. But if it doesn't, keep yourself away from that. Some applications use catch platforms and debris nets or canopies. I don't have a picture of that, but you can imagine what it is. It's a net that's set up below a surface, an upper level surface that people can drop materials, or any material that happens to drop can fall into that debris net. Then never walk or work below a crane when there's loads overhead, even things like concrete buckets and so forth. As far as personal protection, you definitely want to remember to have a hard hat on, because that's really a key part of your PPE. Fatalities handling loads. You can get struck by a load. You can see this guy right here in this picture is an iron worker, and he's dropping a beam into place. And you can see that he's staying out from underneath that load. stuff can go wrong with this. The hooks that are connecting that beam can break. The lines can break. The chokers, the shackles, anything in that area can fail. I mean, good professional guys make sure all that stuff works and you can trust them. But you know, stuff happens, so you want to stay out from underneath the load. Overloading the rigging equipment on the crane, that can happen. Improper rigging techniques, it can be rigged at the wrong angle. Folks can try picking from the wrong bad pick points. I had a case of a whole pallet full of 5-gallon buckets of water, of paint, that were picked up by inadequate pick points, and as it was being moved by the crane over the deck of a ship where it was going to be placed, the pick points where the rigging connected to the pallets broke, and well over 100 gallons of paint broke open when those cans hit the deck. So fortunately nobody was underneath it, but all kinds of things can go wrong with the rigging. Another thing to be aware of, even if you're not working in a crane type environment, you can still be loading and unloading trucks. So this is a picture of where a fatality actually happened. These pipes were tied together with chains, and the worker was too close, and when some of the materials slipped and rolled off the truck and squashed them. So you want to make sure that if you're working around trucks and unloading, that you keep your distance and you're not in a place where you can get hit if stuff falls off. Unsecured material can fall from forklifts or other equipment. So you can see here that where that number 1 is where the worker was when he got killed. Okay, so that's talking about falling objects. Let's talk about flying objects. Tools can create particles when chipping, grinding, sawing, brushing, or hammering. So you can see right here we've got this is a grinder, and it's spinning this grinding disc, and you can see all of these sparks flying off of here. Well, what are those sparks? They're little particles of superheated metal is what it is. And so these particles fly off at a terrific rate. And particles from some tools move at a high speed that can hit you with the force of a bullet, like those of the pneumatic or powder-actuated tools. So we're talking about nail guns and powder-actuated tools. So they're actually generating, nails and fasteners that are shot into a surface using it's gunpowder. That's the powder-actuated tool. I'm going to show you a picture about that in a second. So how can you be protected from flying objects? Well, the first thing you want to do is make sure you inspect the tools before use to make sure that they have all the proper guards on. Anytime you're using one of these tools, this is a grinder and this is a nail gun. Let me get my pointer here. That's the nail gun, that's the grinder, and that's the powder-actuated tool. You want to make sure you get properly trained to use these things. I know some of you guys, you're probably just like me. When I was 19, I was 10 feet tall and couldn't, and bulletproof. And I figured I could figure anything out. If you just give it to me, I'll figure it out. But really, don't be stupid. Get some training. These things can hurt you and hurt other people, so make sure you know how to use these things. You can always ask somebody, show me how to do this. It's a great, great way to learn from someone who knows. Eye protection is important. ANSI Z87 safety glasses, you want to make sure your safety glasses are rated ANSI Z87. You can see that on the safety glasses. They're impact resistant. They can save your eyes. face shields are also important, especially if you have lots of small particles flying around. And of course, wear your hard hat. Here's a picture of a powder actuated tool. It looks like it doesn't really look like a gun, but it actually is a gun. It's like, I mean, it actually is a gun. This strip right here, this yellow strip, that actually is where the gunpowder is, and there's fasteners that are attached to these things. And when this goes off, it shoots a fastener out of the end into whatever the substrate is, whatever the surface is. So if it can shoot a fastener into concrete, it can shoot a fastener into steel, it can shoot a fastener into wood. But you want to make sure that you're shooting it into something that is not going to let that fastener go right through it. In this picture you see, this is the case of a guy who was using the powder actuated tool on the left-hand side, and another worker was on the other side, and he shot that fastener right through and killed the guy on the other side. So you want to make sure that that you have the powder comes in different strengths. So this one's yellow, there's red and different colors. And so depending on the strength and the amount of powder, which shoots it harder and stronger. So you want to make sure that you get the right strength for the substrate that you're shooting into. Again, it's all about training, guys. It's all about training, and don't just be the guy who just says, "Yeah, give it to me, I'll figure it out." You want to have somebody show you how to use this. You always want to insert the fastener before cocking the tool. You always want to cock the tool against, or you never want to cock the tool against your hand or point the tool at anybody. Again, it's just like a gun. Always check penetrations and use proper loads. But that's just what I was talking about. You want to check to make sure that you have the right size load for the surface that you're working on, that you're not going to shoot it right through. So lots of things to know about powder actuated tools, and when you get out on a job, I'm sure you're going to find out more. Another thing to remember is sign must be posted within 50 feet of the area where the tools are being used, so people know when a powder actuated tool. You'll know about it the minute you'll probably hear somebody say "fire in the hole," and then you'll hear a bam, like a gunshot going off. But it's nice if they actually tell you ahead of time. Training is required, and again, don't be embarrassed to ask, "Show me how to do this." Don't be stupid like I was. And just figure that you can figure it out, because you really do need to have some training. I did get some training. So eye and face and hearing protection should be worn. Obviously hearing protection because it's a gunshot going off. The tool should always be held perpendicular to the work surface. You can see the picture over here. The guy is holding that perpendicular to the surface as he shoots a fastener for that board into the concrete floor. Okay. Nail guns, very important. Again, with nail guns, this is a pneumatic nail gun right here. You can see the air line going up to the pneumatic. You want to check your penetration, meaning check to make sure you have it set so the nail just goes through the wood to the level that you want it to. You don't want the nail to go all the way through. Got a couple x-rays here of guys that were working around somebody. I presume they were working around somebody that had a nail gun and not paying attention, and they got nails shot into their heads. Terrible thing to have happen. Equipment inspections have to be made. Safety switches must be operational. The newer nail guns now, you actually have to compress the nail gun against the surface and push down a secondary button near the trigger before it'll initiate. Very, very good safety stuff to make sure that you're not going to shoot a nail without knowing about it. Again, all proper PPE must be worn. Z87 safety glasses and hard hats. Okay, so nail gun injuries. and workers treated in emergency departments in 2005, and really it hasn't changed much. Guys getting shot in the arm, 2,000. Hands and fingers, that's the biggest one right there. Hands and fingers, 16,600. Legs and knees, 7,000. Other body parts, 2,800. So lots of people getting hurt with this type of equipment. They're fantastic. They work really good and save a lot of time, but you really have to be careful around nail guns and get some training. All right, let's go to our summary. Struck by accidents are the second most common killers on construction sites. What are the three major causes of struck by fatalities? You got, falling objects, flying objects, and you have vehicle, right? Those are the three major. Describe how to prevent struck by fatalities. Well, just think back what we talked about. When you're working around vehicles, you got to keep your head on a swivel, keep looking. Never fall asleep or daydream. Don't want to have stereo blowing your ears out with music so you can't hear the backup alarms. Watch for those falling objects and flying objects. And finally, identify those safety requirements for nail guns and powder actuated tools. Again, check for the penetration and make sure you get good training and follow the safety guidelines and make sure the nail guns and powder and actuated tools are inspected and you have the right size charge for the powder actuated tools. So, all right, guys. Hey, that's our next half hour. We're on struck bys. The next session coming right up is going to be on electrical hazards and electrocution. See you then.